Hey guys, Alex here. You may recall from my post on the Facebook page about myself joining Complexity Card Gaming that I actually hope to do videos once again, once I've found myself a bit more time and produced a little bit of content which hopefully might be a little bit fresh, might be a little bit new to a lot of you guys. And hopefully it's something that you actually enjoy, and hopefully I can actually keep going and producing a few more of these types of videos that I want to try and do. So what I'm going to try and do is actually have a look at a lot of the decks in the current meta. And how I'm going to be different is that where you often see on many websites, many article websites or many other YouTube videos, they tend to just give you a full-blown list of what may have been played in the most recent regionals, or what they're considering, playing in upcoming regionals or tournaments, for example. What I'm going to try and do is actually just give you a skeleton list of a lot of the decks that I see out there, and then go into some ideas of what could actually fill up the spaces, for you to make up your own 60 card decks. I'm hoping this way allows you to be a bit more creative with what you do in terms of actual deck building. That way we can start discussing. If people leave comments, we happily have discussions about what kind of cards could be included or could be fit or can fit into certain decks. And I think it's just going to be something that's quite useful for new and, say, older players as well, just to get us a bit more creative in the way we actually deck build. I mean, how I'm actually going to start, if you just see the title just on my that side there, is I'm going to actually start with what a lot of people are currently considering the best deck in the format. It's a deck I played myself at a couple of tournaments now, done reasonably well with it. I of course am talking about Decidueye Vileplume. So a lot of the hype came from the US, where it came top 16 in one of the regionals, where no one really thought how they could partner Decidueye with a really good partner, and it came out that it seemed to work quite well with playing it together with Vileplume, where you can essentially disrupt your opponent from playing item cards through Vileplume's ability, whilst you sit back and feather arrow everywhere, deal damage everywhere, and potentially win the game through that kind of means. So what I'm going to do is actually just with you and with on the screen actually build a skeleton list on PTCGO, have a quick discussion of what actual cards are going in, why certain cards go in, and then we'll have a little look at what kind of cards can make up the rest of the 60, as I had mentioned before. So if I just quickly open into Pokemon TCGO. Right, so with Decidueye Vileplume, Decidueye GX is your main sort of attacker, main card in the actual deck, of course. So to begin with, we would for sure begin with 4 in the actual deck list itself. So you would go a 4-4-4 line, so 4 Rowlets. Oh, yep, tried to have 5, but unfortunately it would be broken if you can actually add more than 4 already. So we have a 4-4-4 line to begin with. Just looking at the Vileplume line itself, it's not necessarily the most important part of the actual deck, although it's partnered with Decidueye GX. A lot of the times you will find yourself looking to set up multiple Decidueyes first. So with that in mind, we're actually just going to chuck a 1-1-1 line. So 1 Vileplume, 1 Gloom, and 1 Oddish. So with the Oddish and Gloom, they don't actually tend to do too much itself. They are just there to essentially evolve into the Vileplume. And as mentioned, it has Irritating Pollen. Each player can't play item cards from his or her hand. Very powerful ability. And just having a quick look through the Decidueye line, Rowlet is quite a standard basic grass Pokemon. Dartrix is quite handy, 80 HP, it has Sharp Blade Quill for a colourless energy, 20 damage snipe to any one of your opponent's Pokemon. Leaf Blade is, you hope not to actually have that many energy on just the Dartrix, but 50 plus. I believe it's 20 more damage if you flip heads, yes, that's correct. And Decidueye, which is a tanky, big HP, 240 HP Pokemon. Abilities Feather Arrow, so it's the most important part of the deck, is once during your turn you may put 2 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So if you have 2 or 3, you are constantly every turn dropping 40 damage or 60 damage onto your opponent's Pokemon in twos in any way you want. So you can set up multiple KOs, you can set up KOs on the active, and then you can use Razor Leaf for Grass Double Colourless. Not the most outstanding attack, but it's relatively does the job, especially when it's sort of added together with Feather Arrow damage itself. It also has a really important GX attack in Hollow Hunt. So for 1 Grass Energy, Hollow Hunt GX, you put 3 cards from your discard pile back into your hand. So essentially is a junk hunt on steroids from the Sableye, but it's not just item cards, it's any free cards. So a lot of times with Decidueye, it's possible to actually play one-offs in decks so that you can actually just grab them back again and then you can reuse them. So with many decks, probably all decks in the format right now, you will need support Pokemon. The one that tends to fit in most in everything is Shaman EX. Everyone knows what it does. It has the ability set up. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench, you draw as many cards until you have 6 in your hand. And it also has a pretty good attack. Sky Return, 30 damage for double colourless. Return this Pokemon and all the cards attached to it back to your hand. So really useful in actually setting up the your multiple stage 3 lines, I guess. But you're just going to be burning through your deck. This deck really relies on you being able to dig through your deck into getting potentially multiple Decidueyes out, or at the very least multiple Dartrix out, so it's ready for your turn 2, and potentially a Vileplume up as well to disrupt your opponent. If you go first and get a turn 1 Vileplume, it can be quite devastating on your opponent in general. So that's 17 cards already, and that's just a skeleton list of Pokemon. If we start looking into trainer cards, we begin with maybe supporters. So the most broken supporter at the moment still and always will be this card. So Professor Sycamore. Discard your hand and draw 7 cards. So we'll probably just start off with a 4 count of Sycamore. N is another very important card for this deck. So because you play so many Pokemon, you're actually playing Vileplume, you lock yourselves out of items yourself as well. So you wouldn't actually necessarily put cards like VS Seeker into the deck, so you would play an even heavier count of Ends and Sycamores and supporters than you normally would in comparison to many other decks where you would not hope to be item locked. So N, each player shuffles his or her hand into his or her deck, and then each player draws a card for each of his or her remaining prize cards. So we'll put it at 3 for now. I think as a very bare minimum, is probably what you want to be playing. You want to make sure that you can refresh your hands, because you play a Vileplume line and so many different, essentially 2 stage 3 decks, stage 2 decks. I might have said stage 3 earlier. I do apologise. I'm not going to go back to change it. I used to do that. I will not anymore. You play 2 stage 2 decks. It can get very clunky, so you need as much hand sort of redraw or sort of discarding, draw, just digging through your deck as much as possible. Another card that you would want to play in a deck like this is something like Lysander. We'll put one in for now. As I said, this is just a skeleton list. So Lysander is you switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with his or her active Pokemon. Very good in comparison together with Decidueye, as you sort of lock up a big retreater, and you have Vileplume up. You could then just start feather arrowing the bench or the active, depending on how you see the situation. But just gives you another maybe couple turns, 3 turns of just 3 damage drops from feather arrow, which is really good, really good. We'll put in the main card outside of Decidueye into the deck as well, which is Forest of Giant Plants. Now this card actually makes the deck run. When this card does rotate or somehow gets overrotted, it's unbelievably unlikely, this deck wouldn't work. But for the time being, as it currently stands, Forest of Giant Plants, where each player's grass Pokemon can evolve during his or her first turn or the turn he or she plays those Pokemon. So, which means it allows you to bench your Rowlets, immediately evolve them into Dartrix, immediately evolve them into Decidueye GX. The same with Vileplume, you could bench to Oddish, evolve straight into Gloom and straight into Vileplume. It makes the deck broken, and it's the only reason why the deck is viable. So you play a maximum of 4 because you need to draw into them, because more often than not you will draw into multiple sort of stage 1s or possibly stage 2s, and you just need to get them out of your hand as soon as possible so you can continue drawing with Shaman or drawing with N or drawing with Sycamore instead of throwing them all away. As we play Shaman, it's only natural to play Ultra Ball. I'm pretty sure this is still 4 of in every deck right now. So discard 2 cards from your hand. If you do search your deck for a Pokemon, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle your deck afterwards. So it allows you to grab pretty much any one of the Pokemon lines, but more importantly, gets cards out of your hand for Shaman as well, so you can continue just digging through and trying to get those multiple Decidueyes down. With 2 Stage 2 decks, you're more often than not going to have at least 4 Pokemon under the health of 90, with 90 HP or less. So Level Ball becomes a really important card in the deck as well. Again, we'll just leave it at 3, as it's potentially less important than getting the others, and just sort of drawing into them with Shaman or other supporters. But if the opportunity for a free search and a free Pokemon selection from your deck is really powerful in this deck, especially combined with Forest of Giant Plants. You can immediately just grab the Dartrix, grab the Gloom, or any of the other, or Rowlet or Oddish, and just bench it. Just continuing with the speed, they're all sort of immediately playable cards, and you're just sort of digging through your deck more because you're just taking another Pokemon out and evolving it straight away. Trainer's Mail. Trainer's Mail, very important card in sort of decks like this, because you need to go for as consistent as possible for this deck. As I said, you have so many Pokemon, and a lot of the time you can just clunk up. With Trainer's Mail, it can give you that out to draw into either a supporter or an Ultra Ball, and it really is quite important. So you will be playing, very likely you'll be playing 4 into this deck as well. Of course, like I said, skeleton list, you can change this, chop and change this how you'd like. Trainer's Mail, look at the top 4 cards of your deck. You may reveal a trainer card there you find and put it into your hand. So really good in terms of search and just upping the consistency of the actual deck itself. The other card I will recommend to put in as a skeleton at the very least as well is Revitalizer. We've seen this card played in decks like Vespiquen and Vileplume. A lot of the time you tend to Ultra Ball or just Sycamore a lot of grass Pokemon away. This card allows you to actually use that to your advantage, particularly with Shaman, for example, where you can put 2 grass Pokemon from your discard pile back into your hand. So if you ever had a hand of Oddish, Gloom, and and a Vileplume with a Shaman in hand and a Revitalizer with well, maybe not Shaman, with Ultra Ball, you can Ultra Ball simply the Vileplume and the Gloom away, grab the Shaman, and you know you have the Revitalizer for the 2-back. Later in that turn, once you're able to get the forest down, you can just quickly pick them back up, drop them down, and you've got your Vileplume line there. Similarly with Decidueye. So it's a really powerful card in this deck. So in my opinion, I think that's what I would suggest at a bare minimum. No, that's a purely bare minimum as a skeleton for the trainer and supporters. For energy, you will of course need grass energy because you will be attacking with Decidueye, either to use its Hollow Hunt GX or even use its Razor Leaf, which is in itself not the best attack but good enough for you to continue the momentum of putting the damage across on your actual opponent's deck, putting pressure on, for example. So at the very minimum, you play 3 grass energy and double colorless. So Razor Leaf is a grass double colorless attack. You also play Shaman for Sky Return. Very useful to play double colorless energy, as it provides 2 colorless energy to all of your Pokemon that it's attached to. Right, so that is, in my opinion, where you should start in terms of a skeleton list for this deck. You can remember I did mention Hollow Hunt allows you to grab any combination of 3 cards from your discard pile back into your hand. So if you do feel like the grass energy is quite skimpy already, you can always grab them back in and put them back into your hand, or DCEs if you had to chuck them away, Lysander, Revitalizer, and any of the lines itself of the actual Pokemon. If you've had to discard a lot more Decidueyes than you wanted to, Hollow Hunt can actually mitigate that issue. So what now I'm going to show you, or sort of have a little look at, is actually how you would beef up this 48 cards into a 60, what sort of decisions you can consider making, whether the metagame might be slightly different. You can incorporate a couple of different attackers, for example. But hopefully give you a bit of a better idea, and how you can potentially be a little bit creative with the deck itself. So give me 1 second, guys. Let me just grab this back up. So we will go into like this. So here we go. So the first thing you can actually do, or have a little look into, is actually increasing the lines of the Pokemon that we play. So already said, and I might have mentioned the 1/1/1 Vileplume line, which I've already put in as a base. A lot of the popular and sort of decks that have done well have played a 2/2/2 Vileplume line, because Vileplume can be really important in certain matchups. It does prove to be a good idea to actually sometimes just go straight for the Vileplume, and the Decidueye you can kind of just draw into. But at the same time, more often than not, when you go for one, the other will sort of just happen at the same time, because you need to get cards out of your hand and you just need to evolve everything together. At the same time, it's a good idea to actually increase the number of Shaman you play. So I've chucked in 2 originally. Increasing it to 3 will allow the opportunity that if one is prized, you still have 2 there to continue digging through your deck, and hopefully will allow you to not miss the actual evolution lines or stadiums or supporters as much as you normally would. The good thing, as I mentioned with Shaman, is that more often than not, when you do bench 2 Shaman, you can just sort of Sky Return back one of the Shamans back into your hand, making sure you're just removing that sort of win condition for your opponents. When you play, you often don't actually have the opportunity to put 3 on the bench, which you often only really want to put 2 maximum, because you do need space for the Decidueyes or the Vileplume or any other attackers you might put in the actual deck. But by just having the DC Sky Return as an option, it allows you to bench the Shamans to actually dig for the pieces that you would need. So yeah, they're 2, I think, good or really good inclusions that you should probably try to do to the actual deck first, before you start teching it with loads more options. If you did go for this kind of, I don't know, added weight into the actual deck itself, that would add another 4 cards to the deck. So it would probably take you up to about 52. And again, that would be a really good skeleton to begin with as well. We'll have a little look at different attackers now as well. So what you get with this deck, because you play DCE, it's really easy to just fit in a lot of just colourless attackers. The two that spring to mind are Lugia EX and Tauros GX. So Lugia EX has fit into other decks which just played double colours before, like even Vileplume Toolbox, because it has the attack Arable, which is essentially 20 times the number of energy on the Lugia and your opponent's active Pokemon. So it does become quite a heavy hitter, sort of if your opponent does start just piling energy on another Pokemon, you can hit them quite hard with Lugia, with Arable, and then just supplement the rest of the damage with Feather Arrow to take the KO. Additionally, its second attack is really powerful as well. Deep Hurricane, which is 80 plus 70 if there is a stadium in play and you choose to discard it. Really good late game sweeper. If your opponent plays certain stadiums to sort of counter the forest, or even just because you have so many forests in your deck as well, you will always be hitting that 150. Now, one of the only drawbacks I have with Lugia is that you do need 2 energy attachments to the Lugia, and more often than not, it's not the tankiest of Pokemon at 170 HP, but it can go down relatively easy as well, especially when it's got 2 double colours on it. Losing 2 DCs can be quite a bit of a chore to also then have to hollow hunt back, or any other ways of getting it back. But I do think it's a really good attacker in a deck like this. Similarly, Tauros has 3 attacks, or Tauros GX has 3 attacks which are all cost double colourless. It's probably the most popular GX attacker to come out of Sun and Moon. It tends to just sort of, as I mentioned, just fit in decks which play DC or have any kind of quick energy acceleration onto the bench, like with Max Elixirs. You can quickly Max Elixir attach and then start hitting with Tauros. And it's a really awkward wall or tank that your opponent would have to play around, particularly under Vileplume lock. Your opponent would then not be able to place things like Escape Rope or continuously Lysander different things active if you have the Tauros active with a Vileplume. Its attacks are really good, so it has its minimum damage it does is 60 with Horn Attack. It has Rage, similar to sort of the Outrage on the old Dragon Pokemon, where it does 20 plus 10 for each damage counter on itself, so it could take hits and then just dish out a lot of damage. And additionally, it has I'd call it a trump card GX attack, which is probably the main reason why it's played in a lot of decks, which don't have a good GX attacker currently. It does 30 times the number of damage counters on itself. So all it needs is 6 damage counters on itself, and it'll be able to deal 180 damage to your opponent's active. Any more than that, and it's overkilling a lot of the time on other opponents' GXs or other opponent Darkrai's, for example, or anything else. It does a lot of damage, particularly if you can get it active and just sit behind it whilst you're feathering behind. So you're just increasing that Horn Attack to potentially with 2 Feather Arrows to 100, 120. With Rage, you're just increasing it from at the bare minimum of 120 up until maybe 180 damage, 200 damage, and then Mad Bull GX. If you're in a situation where you can use it and you don't need to necessarily use Hollow Hunt for that game, it's a really good GX attack. So yeah, I believe it's a really good option as well. It does have free retreat cost, but with Decidueye decks, you don't actually tend to mind what is actually active, as long as it's something that can tank hits, so that you can continue just feather arrowing around your opponent. The next 2 that I've shown in the middle are a bit more niche. Beedrill actually has shown itself to be one of the most popular additions to the Decidueye deck. So its first attack for just one colorless energy is Double Scrapper, which discards 2 Pokemon tools from your opponent's side of the field. Essentially, as I mentioned here, is a Garbodor tool count or / tool counter. Garbodor, of course, with a tool attached, shuts down your abilities such as Irritating Pollen or Feather Arrow. And if you're put in a situation where you can just double Scrapper off and have Vileplume up, they're unable to then reattach a tool without having to then play Hex Maniac or anything like that as well. But then even if they play Hex Maniac, they also still have to KO the Beedrill that turn, otherwise he'll just scrap at you again, and you can continue to lock that way. Additionally, it actually has I'd like to say a pretty good attack with Pin Missile, grass, colorless, energy cost. It does 40 times the number of heads you flip from 4 coins, so it can do a maximum damage of 160 damage. If we say it averages at 80, if you flip 2 heads out of 4, it's a pretty good attack because, like I said, you just supplement it with Feather Arrows, and then you're probably knocking it out with just Feather Arrows by itself, other Pokemon with Feather Arrows by itself anyway, and then Beedrill can continue either Pin Missiling, retreating, and just sitting back until it's ready to maybe either double Scrapper again. Meowth is something that's seen some inclusion in Decidueye decks. Double colorless energy attack cost. I think it's called Turmoil Strike. It deals 50 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon that has damage counters on it already. So really good when combined with Decidueye GX. Particularly just knocking out Trubbish. So we know Trubbish has 70 HP. If you can get a Decidueye down, Feather Arrow to it, and with a Meowth with a DC, you are knocking out that Trubbish, and then you've got another turn of prolonging your Feather Arrows or another opportunity to actually get Vileplume up the next turn. So pretty unique in that sense. It's also, I guess, a good one prize attacker, sort of creating the 7 prize game. It's good if you do get set up with Vileplume and a couple of Decidueye on the bench, you can Lysander a heavy retreater, and then just start hitting away with Meowth, and it does start to add up really quickly, just dealing 50 damage constantly, plus the feather dance. You're probably doing 90 damage on average per turn, and if your opponent can't deal with that sort of scenario where they're either knocking out the Meowth with the active that you've Lysandered up, or retreating and then dealing with it that way, you're just going to be going through a constant cycle of just spreading damage across and then potentially taking the game. The other attacker or Pokemon I'd like to touch upon is Jirachi. We've seen it in the original lists that came out of the US, and actually seen it in lists that actually have been... Well, we've seen it in the good popular lists that have actually done well at tournaments. It's a great card to use to stall against special energy decks. In what I found Jirachi's most use in is actually going against an opposing Tauros. If you can just Stardust the Tauros can't really do much for a bit, and your opponent has to dig for another DCE somehow. And it's only 1 energy cost to use Stardust, which discards special energy, and your opponent's Pokemon during the next turn can't deal any damage or essentially affect Jirachi. It only deals 10 damage, so you're not activating Taurus's Mad Bull or Rage that much either. So you can continue doing that. You just use it once. That gives you another turn of ability of Feather Arrow. You retreat it. If they continue attaching DCs to Tauros, you just bring it active again, Stardust again, and continue doing so. The only other thing is can be quite bad against, not necessarily bad as such, but in the mirror, if your opponent has an active Tauros or Lugia, if they play those two, or Meowth, and you decide to Stardust, they can just kill the Jirachi with Decidueye, without actually attacking it. So it can be quite annoying in that sense. but I think it's a good card that you can potentially try in the actual deck as well. So they're the sort of additional attackers, additional Pokemon that you might want to try. I'm not too sure. There might be a few others that you want to try. If you don't play the Vileplume version, you might try something like Hoot Hoot with the attack Proclaim the Night, which just item locks your opponent. A similar way to Toad, which deals no damage. But there's multiple options. DC is a really sort of splashable energy, and Pokemon tend to be quite splashable with using double colours to actually attack. So if there's anything else, just let me know. We will move into supporter and trainer cards. So again, on the first 4 cards there, if I just shown you there, it's just trying to increase the consistency of the actual deck. You want to be able to constantly be drawing new cards. Under item lock yourself, you want to be using things like N to refresh your hand so you can draw into more of the Decidueye pieces so you can get more down, for example. Level ball so you can burn through your deck a bit quicker because you're having to take out another low HP Pokemon, which you're likely to be able to evolve straight away with Forests of Giant Plants. And a second Revitalizer tends to be the most commonplace now. It's quite odd to drop it down to actually 1 from the skeleton list that I originally had shown. But Revitalizer becomes quite useful, particularly at 2 of them. Because, like I said, a lot of the time you are discarding a lot of your Pokemon. If you do just miss the Forest of Giant Plants, for example, you're having to Ultra Ball a lot of them away or Sycamore them a lot away. As long as you count your Revitalizers, you can find out how many Pokemon you can actually grab back. That's a total of 4 at the very least, and then if you're Hollow Hunt, you can grab back even more. Really useful card in just thinning your deck as well. Or thinning your hand mainly, so you can continue using Shaman before evolving and hopefully hitting a supporter. A second Lysander tends to be quite useful. One tends to get lost in the deck quite often. You don't really dig hard enough for it. Hollow Hunt is very useful in actually grabbing that one Lysander back, but being able to grab that one Lysander back and potentially having another one in the deck is probably where Lysander is most strong, because once you've got the locks up, the Vileplume lock up, or the Decidueye sort of Feather Arrow, let's say, lock up, if you Lysander something quite important, quite big, it becomes really difficult for your opponent to actually deal with, whilst you're just dropping damage per turn without even attacking sometimes. There are additional supporters that, let's say, niche in this kind of deck. I've seen Lily has been played before, maybe in place of one of the Ns or Sycamores. As sort of Maya mentioned, there's a lot of time where you're discarding a lot of the cards. Sometimes when you're burning through, you can use Lily as a supporter on your first turn to draw up to 8 cards. So if you don't know what Lily does, on your first turn you can draw up to 8, but if you use it any subsequent turns, you draw up to 6. So it's it's a better Bianca from what it was before. But it gives you the option to actually hold on to a lot of your cards without actually discarding everything. Maybe if you're just one piece off the Vileplume and you already have a Decidueye down, or you only need essentially the Gloom, you can play the Lily knowing that you've got the Vileplume still in hand, and then hopefully hit the Gloom or level ball that way. Team Flare Grunt, again, it's a useful card. It's useful in the idea that you can just, say, annoy your opponent, but disrupt your opponent even more after already item locking, so that the only things that they could generally do anyway is actually play supporters and attach energy. If you stop that energy attachments or those energy attachments, you're just making life even more difficult for your opponent. Again, something you can Hollow Hunt if you only play the 1 copy, so you can Team Flare Grunt at least twice in the game, whilst you're Feather Arrowing things away. Olympia seems to be quite a good tech in terms of the actual deck itself. However, as I might have mentioned a bit earlier, you don't actually mind what goes active sometimes with the Decidueye deck. as long as you have the Decidueye GX set up on the bench, you're still doing damage without even attacking. So you're sometimes quite happy to let a Vileplume go active, potentially go down, so that you can either use Revitalizer, get it back on your turn, get Ultra Balls or Trainer's Mails, and cards just out of the way. And just continue just dropping Ferro damage. So Olympia, although quite good because Decidueye GX has a 2 retreat cost, Vileplume does have a 3 retreat cost. Some of the attackers I mentioned have 2 and 3 retreat costs as well. And the extra heal was always useful, of course. It seems like a luxury card to have, but you know, if you find in your testing or trying out that it works really well, let me know. It'd be good to hear, actually. But I do feel like it's something that might not be necessary in this deck, but I have seen it in lists before. The other 2 sort of cards I've added, I've just sort of grouped them in consistency cards. I put Acrobike there purely because in conjunction with Revitalizer and Holo Hunt, it allows you to just keep digging. Like I said, the main purpose of this deck is to dig as far as you can so that you can get as many Decidueye out turn 1, get Vileplume out turn 1, and then you're set. You should be set, or you'd like to hope you're set, but once you get a Vileplume up turn 1, a lot of the time you can just win games just like that. And by playing extra cards which allow you to dig through your deck for even further, like Acrobike, you have even more of a greater chance of being able to do so. If I touch upon that as well, if you play stuff like Team Flareground and Olympia, they're not insta-playable cards, which means that they stay in your hand until you Ultra Ball them away or have to play them in a scenario where your opponent's already had a turn so that you can play them. Things like Floatstone, which reduces your retreat cost to 0, which I think is quite important in the deck, because I actually do like retreating between Decidueyes or retreating between into the Shaman so you can Sky Return. Like I said, they're insta-playable so that you can continue burning through your deck. I find them to be more important and allow you to just improve that consistency even by that 1 or 2%. But the opportunity to do so, I think is better than actually just having more tech cards to deal with certain matchups. So that's I think as far as I can go. I mean, the only other thing you can touch upon is actually maybe the energy count. Certain lists have played 4 Grass Energy Index before instead of just a 3. I think 3 is absolutely fine. 4 sort of just gives you the extra safety that you can definitely Holo Hunt or use Razor Leaf with maybe 2 Decidueyes. But 3 should be fine as long as you manage your resources well. But yeah, I think this is a good skeleton discussion. Talked about the deck already. There's many sort of deck lists online that you can have a little look at. I think everyone's done a video on Decidueye Plume. I done it because it's just a deck that I've played in a lot of my last 2 tournaments and just thought it's a nice easy way to actually get back to making videos again. So yeah, if you have any suggestions or if there's anything else tried out or you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below. I know I haven't looked at the camera much, my screen is there. But yeah, just give us a shout, and yeah, I'm happy to have a little discussion about any other potential cards that you could put in the actual deck. If there's anything I missed, I apologise, but I'm doing this at 1:30 in the morning. So yeah, thanks guys for watching. I hope you find it interesting. Hopefully I could do some more. And yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.